The frozen meat slipped from Helena's trembling hands, its dull thud echoing through the silent forest like an omen. After 20 years of feeding the wolves on the mountain, her 82-year-old body was failing her, just when they needed her most. What she didn't know was that the golden eyes watching from the shadows belonged to the king of an ancient species, and her devotion had awakened something far stronger than mere gratitude. The frozen meat slipped from Helena's trembling hands, hitting the snow-covered ground with a dull thud that echoed through the silent forest like a death knell. 20 years of this ritual, 20 years of sacrifice, and now her aging body betrayed her when the wolves needed her most. The bitter wind cut through her worn coat as she knelt in the snow, gathering the scattered portions of raw beef that had cost her the last of this month's savings. Her arthritic fingers burned against the ice, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of failure that pressed against her chest. She'd been 62 when she first stumbled upon the orphaned wolf pups, their mother's lifeless body torn apart by poachers' traps. Now, at 82, Helena could barely manage the 5-mile trek through the treacherous mountain terrain that led to the clearing where she had fed them every morning for 2 decades. Her veterinary practice had long since closed, her savings depleted, her body failing, but still she came. Still she dragged herself through blizzards and ice storms because these magnificent creatures had become the only family she had left in this world. The guilt ate at her like acid. She should have been stronger, should have saved more money, should have found a way to ensure their survival beyond her own mortality. Instead, she was watching herself become a burden to the very beings she had sworn to protect. The wolf pack had grown from those original 3 pups to a thriving family of 15, and they depended on her supplemental feeding to survive the increasingly harsh winters that climate change had brought to their mountain territory. Helena forced herself to stand, her knees screaming in protest. The clearing stretched before her, surrounded by towering pines whose branches sagged under the weight of fresh snow. This was sacred ground to her, the place where she had found purpose after a lifetime of loneliness. She had never married, never had children, had driven away every person who tried to get close with her stubborn independence and caustic tongue. The wolves had been different. They asked nothing of her but food and consistency. They judged her by her actions, not her words or her failings. She arranged the meat in neat piles, as she had done thousands of times before, her movements automatic despite the tremor in her hands. The forest was unusually quiet this morning. No bird songs, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, no sound except the whisper of snow falling through the branches above. Even her own breathing seemed too loud in the oppressive silence. As Helena stepped back from the offering, she caught a glimpse of golden eyes watching her from the shadows between the trees. The Alpha. Even after all these years, his presence still sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He was massive, even for a wolf, with a coat of silver and black that seemed to shimmer in the pale morning light. There was an intelligence in those amber eyes that had always unsettled her, a depth of understanding that seemed almost human. She had named him Darius in her mind, though she had never spoken the name aloud. It felt too intimate, too personal for the careful distance she maintained with all the pack members. They were wild creatures, and she was merely their benefactor. That was the boundary she had drawn 20 years ago, and she had never allowed herself to cross it. But Darius had been crossing boundaries from the beginning. While the other wolves maintained their respectful distance, he often lingered after the others had taken their share and disappeared into the forest. He would sit at the edge of the clearing, those golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. Sometimes she caught herself talking to him, sharing the loneliness and frustration that she kept locked inside around humans. "You understand, don't you?" she would whisper, and his ears would prick forward as if he truly comprehended every word. "You know what it's like to carry the weight of others' survival on your shoulders." This morning was different. Instead of keeping his usual distance, Darius emerged fully from the shadows, his massive form moving with fluid grace across the snow. Helena's breath caught in her throat. In 20 years, he had never approached this close while she was still in the clearing. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he stopped just 10 feet away, close enough that she could see the individual hairs of his thick coat, the slight frost clinging to his muzzle from his own breathing. They stared at each other across the small distance, woman and beast, locked in a moment of connection that transcended species. Helena felt tears burning her eyes, though whether from the cold or from emotion, she couldn't say. This felt like goodbye, as if Darius somehow understood that her body was failing, that she might not be able to continue this ritual much longer. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I'm so sorry I'm not stronger." The wolf's head tilted slightly, and for one impossible moment, Helena could have sworn she saw something like compassion in those golden depths. Then he turned and melted back into the forest as silently as he had appeared, leaving her alone with her guilt and her fears. The walk back to her cabin seemed longer than usual. Helena's legs shook with exhaustion by the time she reached her front door, and she had to grip the frame to keep from falling. The small log structure had been her sanctuary for 30 years, purchased with the last of her inheritance after she had fled the city and the painful memories it held. Here, surrounded by wilderness and solitude, she had found a kind of peace. But peace and happiness were different things, and she had never quite managed the latter. She collapsed into her worn armchair by the fireplace, her body aching in ways that spoke of more than just physical exertion. The loneliness pressed against her like a living thing, heavier today than usual. She had built walls around her heart so high and thick that no human had ever been able to scale them, but somehow a pack of wild wolves had found their way inside. They had given her purpose when she had none, acceptance when she had felt only rejection, and now she was failing them when they needed her most. The first strange incident happened 3 days later. Helena woke to find her snow shovel, which she distinctly remembered leaving propped against the side of her cabin, standing neatly beside her front door. Not unusual in itself, except that she lived alone on 500 acres of wilderness, with her nearest neighbor 15 miles away. She studied the ground around the shovel, looking for footprints, but found only the tracks of her own boots from the previous day. She dismissed it as a memory lapse. At her age, forgetting where she had left a tool was hardly cause for alarm. But the incident nagged at her throughout the day as she went about her usual routine of splitting firewood and preparing the next day's offering for the wolves. The second incident was harder to explain away. Helena had been struggling to stack a cord of wood that had been delivered the previous week, the logs scattered haphazardly in her yard by the delivery truck. The work was backbreaking for someone her age, and she had managed only a small portion before exhaustion forced her inside for the night. When she emerged the next morning, the entire cord was neatly stacked against the side of her cabin, each log perfectly aligned. She searched the area around the woodpile, her trained eye looking for any sign of human presence. What she found instead made her blood run cold. Mixed in with her own boot prints were bare footprints in the snow, but they were impossibly large, with long toes and what appeared to be claw marks at the tips. The prints led from the forest to the woodpile and then back again, but as she followed them toward the tree line, they seemed to change, becoming smaller, more pad-like, wolf tracks. Helena stood at the edge of her property, staring into the dark spaces between the trees, her scientific mind warring with a growing sense of something beyond her understanding. She had studied animal behavior for 4 decades, had worked with wolves in rehabilitation centers before retiring to this mountain sanctuary. She knew their capabilities, their limitations, their patterns of behavior. Wolves did not stack firewood. Wolves did not have opposable thumbs or the reasoning capacity for such complex tool use. But wolves also did not leave human footprints that measured nearly 14 inches from heel to toe. That night, Helena sat by her window with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands, watching the forest beyond her yard. The moon was full, casting silver light across the snow-covered landscape and turning the world into something otherworldly and strange. She dozed fitfully in her chair, jerking awake every time a branch creaked or the wind rattled her windows. It was just after midnight when she saw him. Darius emerged from the tree line, but something was different about his silhouette. He seemed larger than usual, walking upright on his hind legs like a man, but covered in the same silver and black fur she knew so well. Helena blinked hard, certain she was dreaming, but when she opened her eyes, the figure was still there, moving through her yard with purposeful strides. She watched, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and fascination as the creature approached her cabin. In the moonlight, she could see the powerful musculature of his shoulders and arms, the way his fur caught and reflected the silver light. He moved to the side of the cabin where she kept her tools, and she heard the soft sounds of metal against wood as he organized her equipment with careful precision. Helena's hands trembled as she gripped the windowsill. Every rational thought told her she was hallucinating, that stress and isolation had finally driven her to madness. But the evidence was right there before her eyes, impossible to deny or explain away. The wolf she had been feeding for 20 years was something else entirely, something that walked the line between human and beast in ways that defied everything she thought she knew about the natural world. When the creature finished his task, he turned toward her window as if he had sensed her watching. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass, and Helena saw recognition there, along with something that might have been sadness. Then he dropped to all fours, his form shifting and changing until he was once again the wolf she knew, and bounded back into the forest on 4 legs instead of 2. Helena remained at the window until dawn, her mind reeling with implications she wasn't ready to accept. Shapeshifters were the stuff of legends and horror movies, not the quiet mountain wilderness where she had made her home. But the evidence was undeniable, accumulated over days and weeks of small kindnesses she had attributed to coincidence or failing memory. Someone had been taking care of her, helping with tasks that were becoming too difficult for her aging body to manage. Someone who knew her routines, her struggles, her desperate desire to continue caring for the pack that had become her family. Someone who had golden eyes and a coat of silver and black fur, and who could walk on 2 legs or 4 as the situation required. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold, Helena made a decision that would change everything. She would return to the feeding ground that morning, as she always did, but this time she would not leave immediately after distributing the meat. This time she would wait and watch, and if Darius appeared, she would find the courage to acknowledge what she had seen. The truth, whatever it might be, had to be better than the uncertainty that was slowly driving her mad. She had spent 20 years building a relationship with these creatures based on routine and distance. But perhaps it was time to discover what lay beneath the surface of those golden eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. The morning air was crisp and still as Helena made her way through the forest, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. She carried the usual offering of meat, but hidden in her coat pocket was a thermos of coffee and a determination to finally confront the impossible reality that had been unfolding around her. As she arranged the meat in the clearing, Helena could feel eyes watching her from the shadows. The sensation was familiar, but today it carried a weight of expectation that made her skin prickle with awareness. She completed her task with deliberate slowness. Then, instead of retreating as she normally would, she moved to a fallen log at the edge of the clearing and sat down. The forest held its breath around her. Helena waited, her hands wrapped around the warm thermos, steam rising from the coffee like incense in the cold air. Minutes passed, then an hour, but she remained patient. She had waited 20 years for answers. She could wait a little longer. When Darius finally emerged from the trees, he came not as the wolf she expected, but in the impossible form she had witnessed the night before. He walked upright on powerful legs, his body a seamless blend of human and lupine characteristics that should have terrified her, but instead filled her with a strange sense of completion, as if a puzzle she hadn't realized she was solving had finally clicked into place. They regarded each other across the clearing, woman and creature, separated by impossible differences, yet connected by 2 decades of shared ritual and unspoken understanding. Helena's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to remain still, to show no fear or rejection of what he was. "Hello, Darius," she said softly, using the name she had never spoken aloud. "I've been waiting for you." The sound that came from Darius was unlike anything Helena had ever heard from a wolf. It was deeper, more resonant, carrying notes of intelligence and emotion that made the hair on her arms stand on end. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse, the words carefully formed as if each one required tremendous effort. "You know my name." The statement held wonder, and something that might have been relief. Helena's coffee cup trembled in her hands, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "I gave you that name years ago," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I never imagined you could understand." Darius took a careful step closer, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. In this hybrid form, he stood nearly 7 feet tall, his broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist, every line of his body speaking of predatory grace and barely contained power. But it was his eyes that held her captivated. Those same golden orbs she had gazed into countless times, now set in a face that was neither fully human nor wolf, but something magnificent and terrifying in between. "I have understood every word you have spoken to me for 20 years, he said, each syllable carefully enunciated. Every kindness, every moment of doubt, every time you whispered your fears to the wind, thinking no one could hear." The admission hit Helena like a physical blow. All those mornings when she had poured out her loneliness to what she thought was a simple animal, all those confessions of failure and self-doubt, he had heard and comprehended everyone. Heat flooded her cheeks as she remembered some of the more intimate thoughts she had shared, believing herself to be talking to an uncomprehending creature. "Why didn't you ever—" She couldn't finish the question, couldn't voice the hurt and confusion that swirled through her. "Because you were not ready," Darius replied simply. "And because my people have laws older than your civilization. We do not reveal ourselves to humans. The consequences for breaking that law are—" He paused, his jaw working as if the words themselves caused pain. "Severe." "Then why now?" Helena asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Because you are dying." The blunt statement should have shocked her, but instead, Helena felt a strange sense of relief. She had been trying to hide her declining health even from herself, but apparently she had been fooling no one. Darius moved closer still until she could see the individual flecks of gold and amber in his eyes, could smell the wild scent of pine and snow that clung to his fur. "Not immediately," he continued, his voice gentler now, "but your body grows weaker each day. I have watched you struggle, watched you push yourself beyond your limits because you believe we depend solely on your offerings. You do not understand what you have given us, Helena." It was never just the food. She looked up at him, this impossible being who spoke her name like a prayer, and felt something crack open in the region of her heart. "What then?" "Hope," he said simply. "For 20 years, you have shown us that not all humans seek to destroy what they do not understand. You have proven that kindness can exist without expectation of reward, that sacrifice can be made without recognition or praise. You have been a bridge between our worlds when we had believed such bridges were impossible." Helena felt tears spill down her cheeks, freezing almost instantly in the bitter cold. "I was just a lonely old woman feeding stray animals. I wasn't trying to build bridges or prove anything noble. The most profound gifts are often given without awareness of their true value, Darius replied. He crouched down in front of her, bringing his face level with hers, and Helena could see the conflict warring behind his eyes. There is more, I must tell you. But first, you must understand the danger you are now in, simply by knowing what I am. Danger? Helena's voice came out as a croak. Darius nodded grimly. My kind call ourselves the Valkaean. We are the children of the old gods, cursed to walk between worlds, belonging fully to neither. For centuries, we have hidden among the wolf packs of these mountains, living by ancient laws that forbid contact with humans. The penalty for revelation is death, Helena. Not just for me, but for any human who learns our secret. The coffee cup slipped from Helena's numb fingers, shattering against a rock and sending dark liquid streaming across the snow. Then why tell me? Why risk both our lives? Because the alternative is watching you waste away believing you have failed us, Darius said, his voice fierce with emotion. Because 20 years of your devotion has earned you the right to know the truth. And because... He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground between them. Because I could not bear the thought of you leaving this world without understanding what you mean to me. The confession hung between them like a living thing, fraught with implications that made Helena's heart race. She studied his face, this impossible blend of human and wolf features, and saw vulnerability there that took her breath away. How long had he carried these feelings in silence? How many mornings had he watched her from the shadows, fighting the urge to reveal himself? What do I mean to you? She asked softly. When Darius raised his eyes to meet hers again, Helena saw her answer written in their golden depths before he spoke. Everything, he whispered. You are my mate, Helena, my soul's other half. I have known it from the moment I first looked into your eyes 20 years ago, but the laws of my people forbid such unions. A Valkaean who claims a human mate is considered cursed, an abomination to be destroyed, along with the object of their affection. Helena's world tilted on its axis. Mate. The word carried weight and meaning beyond simple human understanding, speaking of bonds that transcended species and mortal life. She thought of all the mornings when she had felt inexplicably drawn to return to this clearing, all the nights when she had dreamed of golden eyes and felt a longing she couldn't name. Is that why you helped me? The firewood, the tools? She asked. I could not court you as a man courts a woman, Darius replied, pain clear in his voice. But I could ease your burdens in small ways. I could ensure your safety without revealing myself. It was torture watching you struggle, knowing I could do so much more if only I could claim you openly. And now? Helena asked, though she feared the answer. Now the choice is yours, Darius said, rising to his full height once more. You can walk away from this clearing and never return. In time, you will convince yourself this was all a dream brought on by isolation and old age. I will ensure that you are cared for from a distance until your natural end comes, and you will never see me again. Or, Helena prompted, though her heart was already racing with the implications of the alternative. Or you can come with me now, tonight, and learn what it means to be the mate of a Valkaean king. King! Helena's voice came out as a squeak. Darius's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that were sharper than any human's, but not quite the fangs of a wolf. Did you think I was merely an alpha of a single pack? Helena, my bloodline stretches back 1,000 years. I am descended from the first Valkaean, those who made the original pact with the old gods. Every pack in these mountains, every clan scattered across the northern territories, they all acknowledge my authority. You have been feeding not just any wolf, but the king of a dying race. The revelation should have been overwhelming, but somehow it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Helena thought of the intelligence she had always sensed in Darius, the way other wolves deferred to him, even from other packs, the almost regal bearing he maintained even in his wolf form. A dying race? she asked, latching onto the phrase that worried her most. Darius nodded, his expression growing somber. We are not as we once were. Climate change has driven our prey to migrate earlier each year. Human expansion has claimed much of our territory. But most damaging of all, our numbers dwindle because we can no longer find mates among our own kind. The bloodlines have become too intertwined, too diluted. Each generation is smaller than the last. But you said claiming a human mate was forbidden. It is, Darius confirmed, but I am king. I have the power to change laws that no longer serve our survival. The question is whether I have the courage to risk everything for love, and whether you have the courage to accept a destiny you never chose. Helena stood slowly, her arthritic joints protesting, but her mind clearer than it had been in years. She looked around the clearing that had been the center of her life for 2 decades, then back at the magnificent being who had just turned her understanding of the world upside down. If I go with you, she said carefully, what happens to me? Do I become like you? The mating bond changes things, Darius admitted. You would gain some of our abilities, our extended lifespan, our connection to the natural world, but you would remain fundamentally human. It is the children of such unions who become full Vulcan. Children? Helena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I'm 82 years old, Darius. That ship sailed decades ago. Time works differently for the mate of a Vulcan, he said quietly. The bond does not make you young again, but it can restore much that age has taken. You would have decades, perhaps centuries ahead of you. Enough time to see our people through this transition, to help us find a new way to survive in a changing world. Helena stared at him, this impossible man offering her an impossible future. She thought of her empty cabin, her dwindling savings, her body that grew weaker each day. She thought of all the humans who had called her crazy for dedicating her life to wild animals, all the relationships she had pushed away because no one understood her fierce need for independence. And then she thought of golden eyes watching her from the shadows, of 20 years of faithful companionship, of small kindnesses performed in secret by someone who loved her enough to risk everything just to ease her burdens. There's a rival pack, she said suddenly, remembering fragments of behavior she had witnessed over the years. Young wolves testing boundaries, challenging Darius's authority. Your authority. Darius went very still. What have you observed? Strange scents in the forest, tracks that didn't belong to your pack, tensions among your people that I didn't understand at the time. Helena's mind raced as she connected dots she hadn't even realized were there. Someone's been watching me, haven't they? Someone who wants to use me against you. You are far too observant for your own good, Darius said, but there was pride in his voice alongside the worry. Yes, Kyle and his followers have been circling closer. He believes that claiming you as a hostage will force me to step down as king. He does not understand that losing you would not make me weaker, but rather turn me into something far more dangerous than he can imagine. Then we're running out of time, Helena said, surprising herself with her calm acceptance of the situation. How long do I have to decide? The new moon is in 3 days, Darius replied. Kyle has demanded I meet him in the ancient circle for a formal challenge to my authority. If I go alone, I can probably defeat him in single combat. But if he has you as leverage, he wins without striking a blow, Helena finished. She looked around the clearing one more time, memorizing the place where her old life would end and something unimaginable would begin. I suppose that makes my decision rather simple, doesn't it? Darius took a step toward her, hope and fear warring in his expression. Helena? She reached up and touched his face, her weathered fingers tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone, the soft fur that covered skin warmed by blood that ran both human and something far older. I've been alone my entire life, she said softly. I've built walls so high that no one could scale them, convinced myself that I was better off without the messiness of emotional connections. But you've been patient enough to wait 20 years for me to be ready for this conversation. I would have waited 20 more if necessary, Darius said, leaning into her touch like a man starved for affection. Well then, Helena said, managing a smile that felt more genuine than any she had worn in decades. I suppose it's time I stopped being such a coward about accepting love when it's offered. The sound Darius made was part growl, part sob, and completely inhuman. He swept her into his arms with supernatural care, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Helena should have been frightened by his strength, by the predatory grace with which he moved, but instead she felt safer than she had in years. There will be challenges, he warned, his voice rough with emotion. My people will not all accept you immediately. Some will see our bond as weakness, others as blasphemy. And Kyle will not give up his ambitions simply because we are together. I didn't survive 82 years by backing down from challenges, Helena replied tartly. Besides, I've been dealing with stubborn, territorial creatures for decades. Politicians and academics are far more vicious than wolves could ever be. Darius laughed, the sound rich and warm in the cold air. You have no idea what you are agreeing to, do you? Not the slightest clue, Helena admitted cheerfully. But I'm tired of playing it safe. I'm tired of living half a life because I'm afraid of what might go wrong. For once, I want to find out what might go right. As Darius carried her toward the forest, Helena caught a glimpse of eyes watching them from the shadows between the trees. Not golden eyes like Darius's, but amber ones filled with calculation and barely contained rage. Kyle, she realized with a chill. The rival who would challenge everything they were about to build together. But for now, wrapped in the arms of a king who had loved her for 20 years without asking for anything in return, Helena allowed herself to believe that some fairy tales might actually have happy endings. Even the dark, complicated ones that began with a lonely woman feeding wolves in a frozen forest. The trees closed around them as they disappeared into the wilderness, leaving behind the clearing where Helena's old life had ended and an impossible new one had begun. Behind them, amber eyes gleamed with malice in the darkness, and the scent of challenge hung heavy in the winter air. The real test was only just beginning. The ancient stone circle stood like a crown of titans in the heart of the deep forest, each monolith reaching toward the star-filled sky with the weight of centuries carved into their weathered surfaces. Helena had never seen this place before, though she had lived in these mountains for 30 years. The stones hummed with an energy that made her teeth ache and her skin prickle with awareness of powers far older than human civilization. This is where it all began, Darius said softly, his breath creating clouds of vapor in the frigid night air. Where the first Valkaean made their pact with the old gods. Where kings have been crowned and challenged for 1,000 years. Helena pulled her new fur cloak tighter around her shoulders, marveling at how much warmer she felt since accepting the mating bond 3 days ago. The changes in her body were subtle, but undeniable. Her arthritis had eased, her vision had sharpened, and she could smell scents on the wind that would have been impossible to detect before. Most startling of all, she felt stronger, more vital than she had in decades. "And where you might die tonight," she said, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since sunset. "Where we might die," Darius corrected grimly. "Kyle will not be satisfied with simply defeating me. He sees you as proof that I have become weak, corrupted by human sentiment. Eliminating both of us would send a clear message to any who might question his authority." Around the circle, Helena could see eyes reflecting the moonlight, dozens of them belonging to Valkaean who had come to witness the challenge. Some watched with loyalty and concern, others with barely concealed anticipation. The politics of immortal beings were apparently no less brutal than those of mortals. A sound like rolling thunder echoed through the forest as massive paws struck the earth in steady rhythm. Kyle emerged from the tree line in his hybrid form, and Helena's breath caught at the sheer size of him. Where Darius was tall and lean with the build of a born warrior, Kyle was a mountain of muscle and barely contained violence. His fur was midnight black, shot through with streaks of silver, and his eyes burned with amber fire that spoke of ruthless ambition. "So," Kyle's voice boomed across the clearing, "the mighty king comes to face judgment with his pet human at his side. How the noble bloodline has fallen." "Careful, Kyle," Darius replied, his tone deceptively calm as he stepped protectively in front of Helena. "You speak of bloodlines as if yours carries any distinction. Your grandfather was exiled from the northern territories for cowardice. Your father died because he was too weak to hold his pack together. Perhaps you should consider whether challenging me is wise when failure runs so deeply in your veins." Kyle's roar shattered the night silence, sending birds exploding from the trees in panic. "At least my ancestors did not shame themselves by rutting with animals." The insult hung in the air like poison, and Helena felt the collective intake of breath from the watching Valkyrian. She started to step forward, anger flaring hot in her chest, but Darius caught her arm gently. "Let him reveal his ignorance," he murmured for her ears alone. "Every word he speaks only proves how unfit he is to lead." "Ignorance?" Kyle laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "I know exactly what she is, Darius, what she has always been. Did you think I would not investigate the human who captured our king's attention? Did you believe her past would remain hidden forever?" Helena felt ice form in her veins. "What is he talking about?" Kyle's grin revealed fangs that gleamed white in the moonlight. "Shall I tell her, my king? Shall I explain why you were drawn to this particular human among all the billions crawling across the earth? Or would you prefer to maintain the romantic fiction that this was simply fate?" "Enough," Darius snarled, but Helena could hear uncertainty in his voice now, a note of fear that had nothing to do with the physical challenge ahead. "Oh, but this is the best part," Kale continued, circling them like a predator, toying with wounded prey. "You see, my dear Helena, your precious mate has been lying to you. Your connection to our kind runs much deeper than simple kindness to wild animals. Tell me, when did your grandmother die?" "What does that have to do with anything?" Helena demanded, but her heart was racing with a premonition of disaster. 1943, Kyle said with satisfaction. "And where did she die?" "In the mountains," Helena whispered, the words torn from her throat by sudden, terrible understanding. "She got lost in a blizzard. They never found her body. Because she never died," Kyle said triumphantly. "Margaret Thorne, born Margaret Shadowheart, daughter of the last guardian family to serve our kind. She didn't get lost in that blizzard, Helena. She ran away. Abandoned her sacred duty, broke oaths that had been kept for generations, and fled to the human world to live a life of selfish freedom." Helena staggered as if struck. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her until she was 12, had always been secretive about her past. She had spoken of old traditions, of debts that must be paid, of the importance of keeping faith with ancient agreements. Helena had dismissed it all as the ramblings of an old woman who lived too much in the past. "My grandmother was a guardian?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "The last guardian," Kyle confirmed. "Born to serve, raised to sacrifice, destined to live and die for the good of our people. But she was weak, just as you are weak. She chose love over duty, just as you have done. The apple, as they say, does not fall far from the tree." Helena felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Everything she had believed about herself, about her choices, about her connection to Darius and his pack, had been built on lies. She turned to look at the man she had agreed to bond with for eternity. "Did you know?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "When you first saw me, did you know what I was?" Darius's silence was answer enough. The pain that lanced through Helena's chest was sharper than any physical wound. 20 years of what she had thought was genuine affection, a connection that transcended species and convention, and it had all been predetermined by bloodlines and ancient obligations. "I knew there was something different about you," Darius said finally, his voice heavy with guilt. "But I swear to you, Helena, I did not know about your grandmother when I first began to love you. That knowledge came later, and by then it no longer mattered. What I feel for you is real, regardless of what brought us together." "Love?" Helena laughed, but the sound held no humor, or just genetic predisposition. "Was I ever really making choices, Darius? Or was I simply following programming encoded in my blood?" "You want to know the truth about choices," Kyle interjected, his voice silky with malice. "Let me tell you about the real choice facing our people. We are dying, Helena. Our bloodlines are failing, our numbers dwindling, our territory shrinking with each passing year. We need strong leadership to guide us through the dark times ahead. We need a king who will make the hard decisions, who will put the survival of our people above his own desires." Kale gestured toward Darius with contempt. "Instead, we have a lovesick fool who would rather play house with a descendant of oath-breakers than face the reality of what must be done. Do you know what he has not told you about the mating bond, Helena? Do you understand what accepting it truly means?" "Kyle, stop," Darius warned, but the younger Valkaean ignored him. "When a Valkaean king takes a mate, that mate becomes the conduit through which his power flows," Kale explained, his eyes fixed on Helena with predatory intensity. "She becomes the anchor that keeps him connected to this realm, the weakness that can be exploited by enemies. Your grandmother understood this. She knew that accepting the bond would doom her and any children she might have to a life of servitude, to creatures who see humans as little more than useful tools." Helena felt something cold and sharp twist in her stomach. "Is that true?" Darius's hesitation was enough of an answer. "The bond is complex," he said carefully. "There are responsibilities that come with being a queen. Duties like bearing children who will be raised as weapons," Kyle interrupted, "like having your life force slowly drained to extend his supernatural abilities, like watching your human family age and die while you are trapped in an immortal prison of obligation." "Enough!" Darius roared, his form beginning to shift and blur as rage overwhelmed his control. "You twist everything to serve your ambitions. Yes, there are burdens that come with the crown, but there are also joys, purposes, connections that transcend mortal understanding. Helena would be my equal, not my slave." "Your equal?" Kale laughed. "She is human, Darius. Fragile, short-lived, bound by limitations that our kind abandoned centuries ago. She will never be your equal, no matter how much power you pour into the bond. She will always be the weak link that brings you down." Helena stood in the center of the ancient circle, feeling the weight of 1,000 years of history pressing down on her shoulders. Around her, the Valkaean watched with hungry eyes, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Behind her stood the man she loved, the king who had hidden the truth about her heritage to manipulate her into accepting a destiny she had never chosen. And before her stood his rival, offering brutal honesty wrapped in promises of destruction. "You want to know what I think?" Helena said suddenly, her voice carrying clearly through the night air. "I think you're both idiots." The words fell into stunned silence. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting to see what the human woman would say next. "Kyle, you see weakness where there is strength, slavery where there is partnership. You're so focused on power that you've forgotten what it means to truly lead. A king who rules through fear and intimidation is just a tyrant waiting to be overthrown." Helena turned to face Darius, her heart breaking even as her resolve strengthened. "And you, Darius, you talk about choice while manipulating every situation to ensure you get the outcome you want. You may not have known about my grandmother at first, but you certainly knew before you revealed yourself to me. How many other little details have you conveniently forgotten to mention? Helena, please, Darius began, but she cut him off with a gesture. No, she said firmly. I'm done being a pawn in other people's games. My grandmother may have run away from her responsibilities, but I am not my grandmother. I make my own choices, and I live with the consequences. Helena walked to the center of the stone circle, feeling the ancient power thrumming through the earth beneath her feet. When she spoke again, her voice resonated with authority she had never known she possessed. I, Helena Thorne, last daughter of the Guardian bloodline, claim my ancestral right to speak for the human interests in this challenge. Kale of the Darkwood Pack, you say our king is weak because he chose love over isolation. I say a king who cannot love his people deeply enough to risk everything for their future is no king at all. She turned to Darius, seeing hope and fear warring in his golden eyes. And you, Darius of the royal line, you say I am your equal, but you treat me like a child who cannot handle the truth. If we are to rule together, there can be no more secrets, no more protecting me from harsh realities. I'm stronger than you think, and I will not be coddled. What are you saying? Darius asked, his voice barely a whisper. I'm saying that I accept the bond, all of it, including the parts you were too afraid to tell me about, Helena replied. I choose to be your queen, not because of my bloodline or ancient obligations, but because I believe in what we can build together. But I accept as an equal partner, not as a protected pet. Helena turned back to Kale, who was staring at her with a mixture of rage and grudging respect. As for you, if you truly believe you would be a better king than Darius, then prove it. But know this, if you challenge us, you challenge both of us. We stand together or we fall together. The power in the stone circle began to pulse with increasing intensity, responding to Helena's words in ways that made the very air shimmer with possibility. Ancient magics that had slept for decades began to stir, recognizing the return of a guardian bloodline to the sacred space. Impossible, Kale breathed, his amber eyes reflecting not just the moonlight now, but an inner fire that spoke of powers beyond the physical. The guardian magic died with your ancestors. Nothing dies, Helena said, feeling strength flowing through her that had nothing to do with the mating bond, and everything to do with awakening something that had always been there, waiting for her to be brave enough to claim it. It just waits for the right moment to return. Around the circle, the watching Valkaean began to shift uneasily as they sensed the change in the atmosphere. Some dropped to one knee in instinctive acknowledgement of an authority older than kings. Others backed away from the stones, uncertain what was happening, but recognizing power when they felt it. Darius stepped up beside Helena, his hand finding hers with careful reverence. Together? He asked. Together, Helena confirmed, squeezing his fingers. Kyle looked between them, reading the combined determination in their faces, the united front they presented. For the first time since arriving at the circle, uncertainty flickered in his expression. Whatever he had expected to accomplish by exposing Helena's heritage, it had not been this awakening of guardian magic that transformed the balance of power in the clearing. This changes nothing, he snarled, but his voice lacked conviction now. You are still weakened by your attachment to a mortal. Then prove it, Darius challenged, his free hand beginning to glow with the same ethereal light that was emanating from the stones around them. Face us both, if you dare. Show our people what your strength can accomplish against our unity. The final confrontation began not with the clash of claws and fangs, but with a battle of wills that made the very foundations of the mountain tremble. Ancient powers awakened, bloodlines revealed their true strength, and in the heart of a stone circle older than recorded history, the future of an entire species hung in the balance. Helena had spent her entire life believing she was alone in the world, but as the guardian magic flowed through her veins and the mating bond connected her soul to the king of the Valkaean, she finally understood what it meant to belong. She was no longer just a lonely woman feeding wolves in the forest. She was a queen, a guardian, and the bridge between two worlds that needed each other to survive. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time in her life, Helena faced it not alone, but with a partner who would stand beside her through whatever came next. And that, she realized, made all the difference in the world.